The 20,000-seat arena of the Zenith Concourse fell into a suffocating hush. High-definition holoscreens, meant to display the grandeur of ceremonial combat, instead broadcast raw, decrypted footage. Above the crowd, the projection showed only shadows. Then, the rhythmic, ragged breathing of a single human hunting an entire swarm-mind invasion force in the dark. Nobody moved. The silence in that arena wasn't just shock. It was the realization of what they had provoked, and you'll want to see how that lesson was taught. 3 cycles earlier, the only sound disrupting the summit was the dull, rhythmic scuff of Elias Thorne's worn, synthetic rubber boots against the concourse's hyper-polished ceremonial tiles. Sentinel Kalen, adjusting his initiate's sash, watched the human wander the perimeter. Kalen stood at attention by the grand atmospheric pillars. As a junior Sentinel attendant, his primary duty was to remain invisible while the titans of the galaxy mingled. Matriarch Voresh of the Xylos hegemony dominated the central pavilion. She was a towering figure of pale blue chitin and corded muscle, her 4 arms resting comfortably on the hilts of ceremonial blades. She was currently lecturing a group of diplomats about her 300-match undefeated streak. Her lower mandibles clicked in a steady rhythm of absolute boredom. Unimpressed. That was the only word Kalen could use to describe the lone human sitting near the ventilation grates. Elias did not look like a dignitary. He wore a faded canvas jacket. His hair was thinning, shot through with gray. He sat hunched over a steaming cup of synthesized broth, watching the matriarch's boasts with the casual, glazed expression of a man waiting for a delayed transport shuttle. Voresh noticed. A warrior of her caliber did not tolerate inattention. Her upper left arm twitched, an involuntary flex of irritation. She dismissed the diplomats and strode across the pavilion, her heavy footfall scattering the lesser delegates. Kalen swallowed hard and hurried to follow, his datapad clutched tightly to his chest. "You find the traditions of the hegemony tiresome, human?" Voresh asked. Her voice was a low, resonant hum that vibrated in Kalen's primary auditory canals. Elias blew softly on his broth. He took a sip, placed the cup on the table. "I find them loud," Elias said. Kalen checked his datapad, frantically searching the protocol directory for diplomatic insults. There was no entry for this. The human's heart rate, displayed on Kalen's biometric scanner, hadn't spiked. It rested at a slow, infuriating crawl. Predator stillness, the Academy instructors called it, though usually referring to apex hunters of the deep core, not aging bipeds in canvas jackets. "I am Matriarch Voresh. My blades have tasted the air of 50 worlds." She stepped closer, casting a shadow that swallowed the human entirely. "Perhaps your species requires a demonstration of martial culture. A cultural exchange in the arena." "I'm retired," Elias said. "A sparring match. First blood or first yield?" "No thank you." Kalen watched the matriarch's chitin flush a deep, angry violet. To refuse a direct challenge was a grave offense. To do so while staring at a cup of soup was unthinkable. "Your people are soft," Voresh sneered, her voice carrying across the now-quiet pavilion. The ambient hum of conversation had died. Hundreds of eyes turned toward the corner. "You rely on automated defenses and kinetic barriers because your biology is weak. You lack the genetic potential for true combat." Elias sighed. It was a heavy, exhausted sound. He stood up. He wasn't tall. He didn't puff out his chest. He simply looked at Kalen, then at the matriarch. 10 minutes, Voresh commanded, turning her back on him. In the central ring, the 20,000-seat arena filled rapidly. Kalen stood at the edge of the sanded fighting floor, tasked with holding the matriarch's heavy ceremonial cloak. The air smelled of ozone and ionized dust. Voresh ignited her twin plasma-edged blades. The violet arcs hissed, casting sharp, unnatural light across her 4 muscular arms. She fell into a wide, aggressive stance. Elias walked into the ring. He carried no armor, no shield generator. He stopped by the weapon rack, ignoring the carbon steel sabers and harmonic disruptors. Instead, he picked up a simple wooden practice rod, testing its weight. The crowd murmured. Several Xylos nobles laughed openly. "A stick," Voresh said, her mandibles flaring in amusement. "You see a retired man with a stick," Elias said softly, stepping onto the sand. "I see 100,000 generations of survival waking up." He didn't take a stance. He just stood there, the rod hanging loosely at his side. Vor-Sh lunged. Kalen's visual receptors struggled to track the opening arc. The plasma blade was a blur of lethal heat aimed directly at the human's neck. The human was simply too frail, too soft to... Wait, why was he already standing behind her? Kalen blinked. He checked his optical feed. Elias hadn't blocked. He had merely shifted his weight, allowing the deadly heat to pass an inch from his collar. Is that it? Elias asked. Vor-Sh spun, all four arms becoming a tempest of violet energy. She struck in a complex, overlapping pattern designed to overwhelm any bipedal nervous system. Elias walked backward. He stepped inside the arcs, tilting his head as a blade hummed past his ear. He pivoted on his heel, letting the second blade slice empty air where his chest had been a microsecond before. He wasn't fighting. He was managing space. A low hum. The crowd's laughter had died, replaced by a confused, nervous buzzing. Vor-Sh's movements grew wider, fueled by frustration. The heat from her blades baked the air, making the sand beneath their feet turn to glass. Elias wove through the attacks with an infuriating lack of urgency. He watched her shoulders. He watched the slight shift of her hips. He was reading her telegraphed motion before she even committed to the strike. Kalen's forefingers tapped nervously against his console. He opened the Galactic Registry, pulling up the diplomatic profile for Elias Thorne. The file was heavily redacted. Black ink covered decades of service. But Kalen had junior clearance for historical archives, and he initiated a deep-layer decrypt. In the ring, Elias tapped the wooden rod against his own thigh. A gentle, almost lazy rhythm. You swing from the shoulder, Elias noted, dodging a downward cleave. Lots of power. Zero efficiency. Vor-Sh roared, a deafening sound that shook the arena's kinetic barriers. On Kalen's screen, the decryption finished. The file didn't list Elias as a diplomat. It listed him as a tactical asset. The ghost of Aegis Prime. Kalen read the summary of the blackout protocol, his respiratory gills flaring in sudden, cold understanding. Vor-Sh's breathing grew ragged. Her massive chest heaved beneath the blue chitin of her armor. Every missed strike was an insult, a chip in the perfect marble of her 300-match legacy. She stopped her assault entirely. The violet plasma blades hummed loudly in the sudden, tense stillness of the ring. You mock the hegemony, Vor-Sh hissed, pointing her lower right blade directly at Elias's chest. You dance around the perimeter like a frightened herbivore. I demand you strike back. I demand to see the strength of your blood. Elias stood near the edge of the glass sand. He resumed the gentle, almost lazy tapping of the wooden practice rod against his own thigh. Thwack, thwack, thwack. It was a mundane rhythm, completely disconnected from the lethal tension boiling in the arena. I don't mourn predators who chose to become prey, Elias said. The words were flat, devoid of anger or pride. And I don't fight for sport. You don't want this. Outside the ring, Kalen's hands trembled violently over his datapad. The decryption of the file had triggered an automated historical security protocol. The Zenith Concourse's mainframe recognized the tactical asset profile and immediately initiated a public threat awareness broadcast. Kalen frantically tapped the abort sequence, but he was locked out. The junior attendant could only watch in horror as the arena's ambient lighting abruptly cut out, plunging the 20,000 spectators into darkness. The arena fell into a suffocating hush. The high-definition holoscreens, which moments ago showed the matriarch's imposing stance, flickered and changed. But this time, Kalen knew exactly what the shadows on the screens meant. The raw, decrypted footage played above them all. It showed a darkened station corridor, the slow, rhythmic breathing of a single human hunting an entire swarm-mind invasion force. The human on the screen moved with a terrifying, mechanical efficiency, dismantling targets in complete silence. The blackout state. The footage ended, leaving the massive arena entirely speechless. The lights flickered back to full luminosity. Vor-Sh stared at the frozen final frame of the broadcast. Her mandibles parted. The arrogance had entirely drained from her posture, replaced by a cold, sharp realization. That is what you are, she whispered. Her voice lacked its previous booming resonance. It was small, reverent. That is what I was, Elias corrected, his grip tightening on the wooden rod. A necessity. Nature gave you 4 arms, matriarch. Necessity gave me a reason to move faster than all of them. Vora Sh slowly turned her head to look at the aging, unimpressive human standing in the sand. The pride of her undefeated streak meant nothing against the ghost of a man who had held a station alone. She lowered her blade slightly. You view this combat as a chore. Not a test of ego, but a burden. Elias nodded once. Then teach me that burden, Vora Sh demanded. Her tone wasn't a challenge anymore. It was a plea. Show me the reality of your survival. Strike me, not as a retired man, as the ghost. Elias looked at her for a long, silent moment. He exhaled a slow breath, and his shoulders dropped. The predator's stillness vanished, replaced by something far worse. It was the complete absence of hesitation. He exploded forward. Kalen's biometric scanner shrieked a proximity warning. It was completely over. Elias closed the 20-foot gap in a fraction of a second, moving under the matriarch's defensive guard before her synapses could even register the threat. The simple wooden rod became a blur of kinetic violence. He didn't aim to cut or pierce. He aimed for the structural vulnerabilities of her physiology. Strike 1 cracked against her lower left knee joint, buckling her balance. Strikes 2 through 5 were a rapid drumbeat against her primary and secondary wrists, deadening the nerve clusters instantly. Strike 6 dislocated her upper right shoulder. The Xylos noble didn't even have time to cry out. Elias moved through her collapsing guard like water flowing through a broken dam. He executed 17 precise, calculating strikes in a continuous, unbroken chain of motion. Kalen watched the matriarch fall to the sand, his cognitive processors lagging behind the physical reality of what had just occurred. 17 strikes in 3 seconds meant the matriarch had been. It meant she was dead before she even realized she had been disarmed. Kalen realized with a cold, sinking dread that humanity did not conquer the stars through overwhelming biological superiority or advanced plasma weaponry, but rather through their terrifying capacity to completely switch off their own empathy when ultimate survival demanded it, becoming perfect, calculating engines of violence. The twin plasma blades hissed as they hit the dirt, deactivating safely. Elias stood over the fallen matriarch. He was not breathing hard. His heart rate, according to Kalen's scanner, had barely elevated. The tip of the wooden rod rested a millimeter from Vora Sh's primary throat cluster. The silence in the arena was absolute. Vora Sh looked up at the blunt wooden tip hovering over her throat. A deep, resonant laugh rumbled from her chest, pure and joyous. Later, standing alone on the observation balcony, Elias handed her the practice rod. It was no longer a mocking joke to the crowd, but the heavy, physical anchor of a new alliance. The simple grain of the wood held the quiet promise of mutual respect,